what the specific factors are that lead parents or guardians to resort to corporal punishment? And have we addressed this particular issue in your proposed measure so that parents, guardians, legally responsible for children will avoid corporal punishments?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to add a point to our previous question, but linking to the current question, on the question of the prevalence of corporal punishment in classes. So it cuts across all socioeconomic classes, but there is also the finding that the more educated the parents are in whatever class, the less the practice of corporal punishment is observed. And this relates to our current
that was what I was expecting.
Yes, Mr. President. But of course, we understand that even in the lower middle class and even in the lower socioeconomic status, when there is striving for education, whether formal education in our schools or non- and informal education outside, the more educated the parents are, whatever their class may be, the less the predisposition to use corporal punishment, and probably the more openness to positive discipline. Regarding the drivers or the sources of use of capital, or rather of corporal punishment in homes or schools, I mentioned, Mr. President, earlier I would like to add here, Mr. President, the inability to control, yes, stress and anger, and the lack of information on other ways of discipline. This is related to, Mr. President, to what I mentioned earlier, that when we parents use corporal punishment to discipline our children, we often express that it hurts not only our child, but it also hurts us. And then the earlier statistics that the good gentleman and I discussed about only 1/3 believing in corporal punishment, despite 2/3 of us using corporal punishment as of 2011, this would substantiate that one of the drivers is the lack of information on alternative ways of child rearing and effective disciplining. And then I would like to confirm what the good gentleman mentioned earlier, also the inability of controlling stress and anger. At yung sinabi din po ng good gentleman na kapag umiinit na ang ulo natin, mas posibleng gumamit tayo ng corporal punishment. Pero kapag nag-iisip po tayo, then nabubuksan natin ang ating kalooban at ang ating child rearing practices sa mga alternatibo, tulad na nga po nitong positive discipline, Mr. President.
All right. Section 3, paragraph B of your bill defines corporal punishment as act or acts which involve physical force and humiliating or degrading acts imposed upon a child as punishment for an alleged or actual offense inflicted by an adult or by another child who has been given or has assumed authority or responsibility for punishment or discipline. My question, based on this provision, does it mean that the child who was given the responsibility for punishment or discipline of another child can be held liable under this proposed measure?
In principle, Mr. President, yes, this other child, presumably an older child such as an ate or a kuya or an older immediate family member or relative, could be held liable. But the main subjects and co-participants of the bill are parents and guardians and teachers whom the bill wants to empower to learn to let go of corporal punishment and instead take on positive discipline. And so that particular phrase in Section 3, letter B, Mr. President, at the proper time, I would be open to subjecting it to amendments. The second point, Mr. President,
yes,
is the main spirit of...
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. The main spirit of the bill is not punitive. It is empowering. and I was earlier discussing this also with another advocate, the main point of the bill is not criminalization, but really enabling and empowering the parents to learn an alternative means of rearing and disciplining our children, which is positive discipline. And that is reflected in another section of the bill, Mr. President, in terms of infractions and the corrective measures that will be put into place in such situations, Mr. President.
You see, Mr. President, my attention was caught by the phrase, by another child. And then the answer to my question is affirmative, and the child can be held liable based on what the sponsor said. But if in that case, Section 5 or any part of Senate Bill 1477 does not make mention of the same as among those who can be held liable. I think those who can be held liable based on your measure are only parents, guardians, and persons responsible, legally responsible for the child.
As I
So
mentioned,
are we going to include that? Would you agree to include that or remove that particular phrase?
actually, Mr. President, if the good gentleman reads again Section 5 on line 22, relatives who have custody of the child or other persons legally responsible for the child, in principle that may extend to a similar, another child mentioned here. But as I mentioned earlier, Mr. President, in relation to the earlier Section 3, at the proper time I would be open to an amendment, since the main desired participants in the implementation of the law on the side of the home and the school would be the parents, legal guardians, and teachers, Mr. President.
Perhaps you may want to jive it with letter G in your definitions, because in letter G of your definitions, defining persons legally responsible for a child, including those exercising special or substitute parental authority, it cannot be a minor.
Yes, Mr. President, the good gentleman is correct, and I will take that into strong consideration
right.
in the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. So, specific corporal punishments are enumerated in Section 3, paragraph B of this measure. Among the listed examples of corporal punishment is refusal to provide the child's physical needs. Refusal to provide the child's physical needs.
This refers,
in other words, wait.
yes, Mr. President.
How does it differ from the definition of child abuse under Republic Act 7160? Child abuse refers to the maltreatment, whether habitual or not, of the child, which includes any of the following. Tapos number 3 dun, unreasonable deprivation of his basic needs for survival, such as food and shelter.
Yes, Mr. President. The Section 3, letter B, corporal punishment, number 4, refusal to provide the child's physical needs, refers to deprivation of basic needs like food, and we have actual cases of this already, Mr. President. Deprivation of food, deprivation of ability to change into clean clothes, locking out of the house, being cut off from communication with their siblings. Very painful, documented examples of corporal punishment, Mr. President, done within the context of disciplining and taking the form of this kind of withholding of the child's physical needs, Mr. President.
Kasi, Mr. President, I'm concerned about the inclusions of a child's physical needs. You know, is the definition of the term physical needs subjective? Kasi doon sa Republic Act 7610, maliwanag, no? That the law ensures that the basic needs of a child is be met. Okay, now, In the definition of term physical needs, is it subjective? Meaning, will it depend, won't it depend on the parents or the guardian's financial capacity? Like, for example, giving the favorite, sino ba yung paborito rito sa ating member na sila? Instant noodles. Giving instant noodles to children every day because that is the only food that the parents can afford. We all know that instant noodles could increase the risk of metabolic syndrome given its high sodium, unhealthy saturated fat, and glycemic loads. So, letting the child eat instant noodles might bring their children to harm. Can the parents of these children be held liable under this proposed bill? Ayun lang ang kaya nila yung ipakain sa anak.
No, Mr. President. As the good gentleman was asking earlier, corporal punishment is child abuse, as explained in the cited Republic Act. But in this bill, corporal punishment is child abuse done in the context of discipline. For
Right.
example, to withhold dinner, whatever